Thank you. Hare Krishna. Devotees, good morning. Thank you for joining today. We are going to be discussing, or I'll be reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, verse chapter 13, verse number 18. So let me begin with my prayers. ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानञ्जनाशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरौ श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरुन् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगण रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवम् साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादान् सहगणा ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च हे कृष्ण करुणा सिन्धु दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कान्ता राधा कान्ता नमोऽस्तुते तप्त काञ्चन गौरङ्गी राधे वृन्दावनेश्वरि वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये वाञ्छकल्पतरुभयश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंदा हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। नमा ओम विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमति भक्ति वेदांत स्वामिन इति नामिने नमस्ते सारस्वती देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशे तारिणे। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Okay, so let me share my screen. Again, we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, 13th chapter, and verse number 18. विदुरस्तद् अभिप्रेत्य धृतराष्ट्रम् अभाषत राजन् निर्गम्यतां शीघ्रं पश्येदां भयमागतम्। विदुरस्तद् अभिप्रेत्य धृतराष्ट्रम् अभाषत राजन् निर्गम्यतां शीघ्रं पश्येदां भयम् आगतम्। Synonyms: Vidura, Mahatma Vidura, Tad, that, Abhipretya, knowing it well, Dhritarashtra, unto Dhritarashtra, Abhashata, said, Rajan, O king, Nirgamyatam, please get out immediately, Shigram, without the least delay, Pashya, just see, Idam, this, Bhayam, fear, Agatam, already arrived. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Mahatma Vidura knew all this, and therefore he addressed Dhritarashtra, saying, My dear king, please get out of here immediately. Do not delay. Just see how fear has overtaken you. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Cruel death cares for none, be he Dhritarashtra or even Maharaj Yudhishthira. Therefore, spiritual instruction, as was given to old Dhritarashtra, was equally applicable to younger Maharaj Yudhishthira. As a matter of fact, everyone in the royal palace, including the king and his brothers and mother, was raptly attending the lectures. But it was known to Vidura that his instructions were specially meant for Dhritarashtra, who was too materialistic. The word Rajan is specially addressed to Dhritarashtra significantly. Dhritarashtra was the eldest son of his father, and therefore, according to law, he was to be installed on the throne of Hastinapur. But because he was blind from birth, he was disqualified from his rightful claim. But he could not forget the bereavement and his disappointment was somewhat compensated after the death of Pandu, his younger brother. His younger brother left behind him some minor children, and Dhritarashtra became the natural guardian of them. But at heart, he wanted to become the factual king and hand the kingdom over to his own sons, headed by Duryodhana. With all these imperial ambitions, Dhritarashtra wanted to become a king, and he contrived all sorts of intrigues in consultation with his brother in law Shakuni. But everything failed by the will of the Lord, and at the last stage, even after losing everything, men and money, he wanted to remain as king, being the eldest uncle of Maharaj Yudhishthira. Maharaj Yudhishthira, as a matter of duty, maintained Dhritarashtra in royal honor, and Dhritarashtra was happily passing away his numbered days in the illusion of being a king or the royal uncle of King Yudhishthira. Vidura, as a saint and as the duty bound, affectionate youngest brother of Dhritarashtra, wanted to awaken Dhritarashtra from his slumber of disease and old age. Vidura therefore sarcastically addressed Dhritarashtra as the king, which he was actually not. Everyone is the servant of eternal time, and therefore no one can be king in this material world. King means the person who can order. The celebrated English king wanted to order time and tide, but the time and tide refused to obey his order. Therefore, one is a false king in the material world, and Dhritarashtra was particularly reminded of this false position and of the factual fearful happenings which had already approached him at that time. Vidura asked him to get out immediately if he wanted to be saved from the fearful situation which was approaching him fast. He did not ask Maharaj Yudhishthira in that way because he knew that a king like Maharaj Yudhishthira is aware of all the fearful situations of this flimsy world and would take care of himself in due course, even though Vidura might not be present at that time. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Gyananjanashalakya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. I was born in the darkest ignorance, and my spiritual master opened my eyes with the torch of knowledge. I offer my respectful obeisances unto him. Okay, so there are few things as we see the verse and the purport both focus on death, and Prabhupada begins the purport with the sentence, cruel death cares for none, be he Dhritarashtra or even Maharaj Yudhishthir. Therefore, spiritual instruction as was given to old Dhritarashtra was equally applicable to younger Maharaj Yudhishthira. So when I was preparing for this verse and going through this verse and purport, obviously the topic is cruel death cares for none. And that reminded me of when I was new in ISKCON, and I used to hear lectures, and usually most of the times devotees will talk about death, and I used to think why these ISKCON people they talk only about death. There's so much there to to be li- um, um, proud of. There's so much things to look forward to in life. And I was thinking at that time that, yeah, this talking about death is being, yes, everyone knows that death comes, but it is being pessimistic. So, and here I am talking about this exact same thing. So we'll go through this topic in a step by step way. So let's understand what was the purpose of Vidura's visit. Vidura, as we know, he had gone. He had gone to on a pilgrimage, and he had talked with Maitreya Muni, and he had been with him and getting spiritual knowledge and instructions from him. And he was already a self-realized person, but with this association of Maitreya Muni and the knowledge and instructions, he was even more convinced, or whatever we may want to understand. So he came back to Hastinapur, or to the kingdom, with just one purpose, which is to deliver his brother, save his brother. We know that with the Vidura, they were three brothers: Pandu, Dhritarashtra, and Vidura. And Dhritarashtra was the eldest of them. Pandu was the middle, and Vidura was the youngest. But all these three brothers, they had some disadvantage or the other. For example, Pandu was pale in appearance, and his nature was also similar. Dhritarashtra was born blind, and Vidura was born from the womb of a Shudrani. So they all had some disadvantage, but based on these disadvantages, Pandu was still considered the best, and therefore Pandu was selected as the king. And Dhritarashtra had taken that as a grudge in himself. Now, over time, Pandu died, and Dhritarashtra did become the king, but he was a caretaker king until the eldest son, which was Yudhishthira, was old enough to become the king. And that was not sitting very well with him, as Prabhupada mentions in the purport. So Dhritarashtra wanted to be the king internally, even though he was blind. That was his consciousness. Now, fast forward from there, he was the guardian of Pandu's son as well, and and he, like Prabhupada mentions in the purport, he with his what is his brother-in-law Shakuni, he devised many plans to get rid of the Pandavas, but with Lord's mercy, that was not to happen. So now, fast forward, and the Mahabharat war has happened, and all the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra, headed by Duryodhana, had been killed. The war was won by the Pandus, and now, sorry, Dhritarashtra was living with Yudhishthira and the Pandavas. So this is the current situation, and we can all imagine, like, I mean, Yudhishthira was respecting Dhritarashtra very nicely. He was keeping him very nicely also. But Dhritarashtra, even after knowing that the Pandavas had won and they had killed his own sons, 100 sons, he was still living in their palace under the care of Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira, being nice and a pious person, righteous person, he was taking care of Dhritarashtra in a very nice way, giving him the highest honor, just like a king. And therefore, Dhritarashtra was thinking that he is still the king. And Vidura sarcastically calls him a king in this verse because he's not really the king. And therefore, Vidura is asking him to leave immediately because he's living like a dog. So this is the situation of Dhritarashtra. He's being taken care by the Pandava brothers headed by Yudhishthira, even after everything happened, where the Pandavas had killed his 100 sons, and yet he was clinging on to this thing about the kingdom, the attachment to material things, etc. So Vidura's ultimate purpose, was to rescue Dhritarashtra from ignorance. So what is this ignorance? We'll talk about it. But basically, the ignorance is this impen- im- impeding death that is there, which is coming for him, especially for Dhritarashtra. It's for everyone, but especially for Dhritarashtra because he has lived his life and he's in his old age now. And the older we are, the closer we are to the death. It is said that Prabhupada often said in his lectures, and he has written also, that every day we live, we are dying one day, meaning that we are getting closer to death. So that's the ignorance, or that's the impeding death, which Vidura wants Dhritarashtra to realize. There's a story also about Yudhishthira when the brothers were in the forest, and the they were thirsty and they had gone to a pond, and the pond was poisoned. And when they drank the water, there was a yaksha who had owned that pond, and he would ask the brothers one by one to answer his questions before they could drink the water. And because they were so thirsty, they did not have the patience, and because of that they drank the water and they lay unconscious, or even uh, they did not have consciousness also in them. When Yudhishthira went, he was patient enough, and he answered Yaksha's question. And one of Yaksha's question was that, what is the most wonderful thing? And Maharaj Yudhishthir answered, the most amazing thing is that even though every day one sees countless living entities dying, he still acts and thinks as if he will live forever. Now, that's the case with everyone, each one of us, including, like, I don't think of that. I don't live as if I could die any day. That's certainly true, and this is this is something to be realized. And so is this pessimism, I mean, being pessimistic. So there there are two different things, being pessimistic or factual. So when we are talking about fact, we are actually trying to bring it out rather than being pessimistic, that let's do something about it. Let's try to understand what is this, what is death, or what is the real purpose of life. So human life is of there are many living entities, and of those living entities, human life is a life of responsibility. Now we see that in the other species of life this is not the case, which means that they don't necessarily live a life of responsibility. So what does this mean? We have a lot of, or many responsibilities. We have the responsibilities of our families, of our children. We have many different responsibilities that we take care of in our lives. But all those responsibilities are aimed towards the highest responsibility, which is preparing ourselves for the final examination of life, which is the death. It is said that death is as sure as death. Now, when we say that among all these responsibilities, the highest responsibility is to prepare oneself for the final examination of life, we see that we prepare ourselves for the next stage of our life every time in all our phases of life. For example, when I was a student, I was preparing myself for the next phase or stage of my life, which is to live a life where I would have a job, where I would have a family, where I would marry, have children, etc. So to prepare for that life, I was preparing myself, going to school, going to college, trying to build my career, apply for a job, get a job, etc. So constantly trying to prepare myself for the next. And then when we are in the grihastha stage, which is we are married, we have children, and we do pretty much everyone, we try to prepare for the next stage of life, which is the vanaprastha or the retirement life. We prepare ourselves by saving enough, by making preparations for retirement, having a retirement, building a retirement home, planning where we will live. Maybe right now I'm in Chicago and it's too cold when I'll be old. So maybe I want to live in a warmer place, have enough money to last, save in my 401k, etc., etc. All those planning is there. But then we see that when we are in vanaprastha, of course, nobody goes through the other stages of life, which are the sannyasa or the renounced order of life. But but as I said earlier, the closer or the older we get, the closer we are getting to death. But how many of us are preparing for death, which is the final examination of life? Very few. And we are fortunate enough that those of us who have come in touch or contact with Krishna consciousness, we are preparing ourselves, or we are being prepared, we are being trained for that final examination and beyond, actually. So that's the wonder of this Krishna conscious movement. So like Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 8.6, Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam त्यजति ante kalevaram tam tam eva iti kaunteya sada tad bhava bhavitaha. Meaning, whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. So this is the formula that Krishna gives in the Bhagavad Gita, that whatever state of being, whatever consciousness I have developed, whatever consciousness I have at the time of my death when a person quits his body, O son of Kunti, that is the state he will attain without fail. So that is the state, meaning in the next life, that is the body, that is the state that the person gets. So if we look at this formula, what we understand is that then the ultimate responsibility becomes to purify our consciousness. Because if consciousness is what matters when we are at the point of death, then the consciousness needs to be purified. And Krishna further says in Bhagavad Gita that whatever state of, like his state of being one remembers, he quits his body, but one who remembers me comes to me. So a very clear indication that one who has developed the consciousness or Krishna consciousness, that's why this movement is also called Krishna consciousness or International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So that is the ultimate goal or responsibility to develop Krishna consciousness. Why? Because Krishna himself says in the Bhagavad Gita, one who thinks of me, one who remembers me at the time of death comes to me. So that is the ultimate goal that we have to try to attain. And now further talking about like still talking about this ignorance or about this this fact that we don't all prepare for that. We understand the way most of us live our lives is trying to mitigate the miseries or the dangers. So we are constantly faced with miseries and dangers. Padam padam yat vipadam. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that every step there is a danger. So right now, for example, we are going through this situation, this pandemic, COVID-19, and we are all in our best capacity trying to avoid and mitigate this misery or this danger. And the success criteria for most people is that being able to avoid being contaminated by this COVID-19 virus until the pandemic ends. If I'm able to do that, then I am successful. So this is the mentality that's what we are constantly trying to do. So pandemic is currently, but even outside or without the pandemic, we are constantly facing danger, constantly facing miseries, constantly trying to defend ourselves, janma mritu jara vyadi. So constantly trying to react. So that's the next point I was trying to get at, that we are constantly reacting to the situations that we are given. We know that the difference between react and response. So and it's talked about in the corporate world also, that try not to react but try to respond. Now this is everything talked in the corporate world or anywhere in the material world. The basis is always spirit or the spiritual. So here also we see in our spiritual life also, we are in, I mean, trying to develop spiritual life, we can understand that in our the lives we live in the material world, we are constantly trying to react, meaning material nature gives us some difficulties, some miseries, some problems, some dangers, and we are simply trying to mitigate them. That's it. That's how the life ends, trying to constantly mitigate the problems of life. So that's one of obviously that some again someone may say that we are being pessimistic. So yeah, we are not only trying to mitigate the problems, we are also at the same time trying to maximize our sense pleasure. So these two things are going on, trying to maximize the sense pleasure and fighting the miseries. So what is the alternative to get out of this ignorant platform is to understand the spiritual platform. And once we understand the spiritual platform, try to act at a spiritual platform, because the material platform is temporary, and the dangers and miseries that the material energy gives us or presents in front of us, they are also temporary in nature. And using when we are acting or trying to react, we are also reacting or acting at a temporary level, because our body is temporary, and using our body and mind, we are trying to react. Therefore we are at a temporary level. Versus if we act at a spiritual platform, then that is a permanent solution, or a more at a soul platform, which is trying to get above these constant uh, hankering and lamentation. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita also, in the last chapter, na shochati na kangshati. What is that verse? Brahma bhuta prasannatma na shochati na kangshati sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. So we are constantly trying to hanker and lament. But when we are at the Brahma Bhuta stage, when we are at the Brahman platform, which means that we are at the spiritual platform, that's when we can get above these constant hankering and lamentation, constantly trying to enjoy or maximize our sense gratification or trying to react to the material miseries and problems. At that spiritual platform, we become prasannatma, happy. That is the real happiness. So, some examples of those platforms. It's very easy to understand the reactive nature of ours trying to mitigate problems and miseries. But what is the example of acting at a spiritual level? Now, there are several examples in the scriptures, and since we are reading Srimad Bhagavatam and we have gone through these different chapters of the first initial chapters of first canto, we know the example of Maharaj Parikshit is very clear for us. So Maharaj Parikshit, we know the story that he had been cursed by a Brahmana boy to die in 7 days. Now, in those days, he knew very that a curse from a Brahmana is going to happen, and he was serious about it. He knew that he will die in 7 days. Now, if something like that happened to us, let's say something equivalent of that, if, for example, I have a terminal disease or a terminal disease, cancer or something, and the doctors say you have so and so much amount of time to live, what general people, how will they will again go into the reaction mode, meaning trying to find like very it's a very sad situation in the sense that they will try to first they will try to mitigate. They'll try to find out how can I save myself, how can I, is there any medicine, is there any treatment out there, trying to fanatically look for something, appeal to the doctors, look for something, and also so these are all reactory mode. And if we don't find, then the next stage is that, okay, what do I do? How can I maximize my time during this time that I have? Mostly it will be in a sadistic state. Now looking at Parikshit Maharaj's example, what did he do? He immediately took this as an opportunity to perfect his life. He sought out his spiritual master. He sought out Sukadev Goswami, and Sukadev asked him to recite Srimad Bhagavatam. Sukadev Goswami recited Srimad Bhagavatam. Maharaj Parikshit very attentively listened and assimilated Srimad Bhagavatam, and by doing that, he perfected his life. So that is the responsive method at the platform of the soul, at a spiritual platform. So like that, there are many examples. This is an example from the scripture Srimad Bhagavatam, but there are many real-time examples also. Many. Even in our sampradaya, even among the devotees that we are associated with, we see these examples very often. We have Srila Prabhupada's example, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's example. We have other devotees, contemporary devotees examples also in our own lives, who acted at a spiritual platform and perfected their lives. So now going to the next topic, which is cruel death cares for none. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that Mrityu sarva haras chaham, meaning I am that death. So actually 10.34, I'd like to read the translation. Let me quickly bring it up, or rather, I'll read it. So the verse is Mrityu Sarva Haraschaham Udbhavascha Bhavishyatam Kirti Shrirvakcha Narinam Smritir Medha Driti Kshama. So I am the all devouring death, and I am the generating principle of all that is yet to be. Among women I am fame, fortune, fine speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and patience. So Krishna here says that I am the all devouring death. So if we don't take to this responsive platform or to the spiritual platform, or like I was saying earlier, the prepare for that final examination, then it doesn't mean that it will not happen or it will not come. Krishna comes as death. We don't want to see Krishna, but Krishna will nevertheless show himself in a form, in an unpalatable form, which is death. And as I said before, death is as sure as death, meaning it is inevitable. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, the famous verse 2.19, Dehi nosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yovanam jara tatha dehantara prapti tiras tatra nam huyati. So just like we are passing through different stages of life, child, boyhood, childhood, youth, old age, similarly uh, at the time of death, we'll be passing from old age to another body. So death is inevitable, as sure as death, as they say. So what is the difference? A person who is cultivating spiritual consciousness and a person who is in the material consciousness, they are both dying. So what is the difference, one may ask? I- if you tell me that by developing spiritual consciousness I will not die, then maybe it makes sense. But what what is that difference? So that the the difference is that, like I was talking about earlier, Krishna talked about the in Bhagavad Gita 8.6, he's talking yam yam vapi smaran bhavam. So whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, O son of Kunti, that state he will attain without fail. He says without fail. That's a formula he's giving. So that is the difference. If we are dying in a material consciousness, we will get a material body. If we are dying as devotees who has cultivated their spiritual life, who have perfected their spiritual life, they will not have to see this material life again. That is Krishna's promise. And we see that through many different examples also in scriptures, in our contemporary devotees' life, etc. So there's another point I had written here in my notes, just came. I thought it's an interesting thing. I saw one devotee. He had written in one of his posts, life is a terminal disease. So generally we talk about terminal diseases, meaning like I was talking about earlier, there is a disease and we call it or term it a terminal disease when it is, for example, an incurable disease that is predictable that in a certain amount of time it will kill the person. So that's a terminal disease. Now, life also is a terminal disease, meaning life is something that will end. It has a start date and it has an end date, meaning the life in this particular body. So in one sense, life is also a terminal disease. Now, instead of trying to close our eyes like the rabbit does, what does the rabbit do? It closes its eyes when there is an impending danger. Similarly, we are trying to engage ourselves in these material activities, choosing to ignore the real danger, the impending death. And in turn, because of that, we are constantly and continuously circulating in this unlimited karmic reactions and cycle of birth and death. So, this is not a pessimistic view of life. This is the fact according to the scriptures. And here, Vidura is simply trying to bring that fact to his elder brother, being compassionate for his elder brother, even though he was not treated very well by his elder brother, Dhritarashtra. He still is compassionate, and he came here just to deliver his brother, just to make this realization for his elder brother. So I'll quick end with a few more thoughts here. So the in Krishna consciousness, we don't say that by when we say that we have to prepare for this final examination, we have to prepare for the death, and instead of trying to see it as a pessimistic view of life, in Krishna consciousness it's a it's a life. It's a very enjoyable, happy life. In fact, and what is that? We eat prasadam, nice prasadam. We cook bhoga for the Lord, and we eat it. We chant, engage in different services of the Lord according to our skills and mentality. We accordingly we engage in different services of the Lord. So we are doing everything that we normally do, but simply dovetailing them for the service of the Lord, or dovetailing our consciousness, which is the most important thing. And by doing that, we are gaining sukriti. So kriti means credit, and sukriti means basically spiritual credit, because there is another type of credit also, which is the material credit, which we try to gain in the karma kanda section, or karma kanda life, and that is the punya. So punya is the material credits, and when we get material credits, we get materially rewarded also. But those material credits are temporary. The credit gained by punya is temporary, but sukriti, the spiritual credits that we get, are permanent, because they are spiritual credits, because they are at the platform of the soul, whereas the punya is at the platform of the material body. So now, one last thing is, we do in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that, or rather, Vidura is including Yudhishthira also, because everyone gets old. So today, Dhritarashtra is old, but tomorrow it will be Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira is young right now, but everyone gets old. So there's a story. I don't know if Srila Prabhupada, I know he did talk about this, but if this was the exact story, or I heard it from some devotee. But there is a story where there are two cow dungs are there. One of them is wet and one of them is dry. Now the wet cow dung is laughing at the dry cow dung. Why? Because the dry cow dung is being picked up and being thrown into the fire as fuel. And the dry cow dung is telling the wet cow dung, it's just a matter of time, which means that the wet cow dung will also get dry, and the time will come for the dry cow dung also to go in the fire. And to end, Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport at the end that Vidura asked him to get out immediately if he wanted to be saved from the fearful situation which was approaching him fast, which is this situation of death. And then Prabhupada writes that he did not ask Maharaj Yudhishthira in that way because he knew that a king like Maharaj Yudhishthir is aware of all the fearful situations of this flimsy world and would take care of himself in due course, even though Vidura might not be present at that time. Meaning that he knew that Yudhishthir, Maharaj Yudhishthir is already cultivating the Krishna consciousness. He is at a spiritual platform. Obviously, we know that he's Dharmaraj, so he is one of the Mahajans. But from a fact, considering to be at that particular moment, Vidura is thinking or saying, or Srila Prabhupada is actually saying that Vidura quite very well knew the position of Maharaj Yudhishthir, and therefore he did not talk in that way to Maharaj Yudhishthir, but only to Dhritarashtra, because he knew that Maharaj Yudhishthir, when the time comes, will be able to take care of the situation, meaning that he will be able to detach himself from this material world and give up this material world and go practice the Krishna consciousness. So I'll end here and I'll quickly recap. So I began with the purpose of Vidura's visit. Vidura was the youngest brother among Dhritarashtra, Pandu, and Vidura. They were all disadvantaged by in some way or the other. Dhritarashtra was blind, Pandu was pale, and Vidura was the son of a maidservant. But among them, Pandu was the king. He was selected as the king, but after his death, Dhritarashtra was the king, but being blind, he was just given the responsibility until Yudhishthir Maharaj became capable. So, purpose of Vidura's visit is to take and Dhritarashtra's consciousness is to continue to be the king and wanted to be the king and his sons to be the king. So Vidura's visit after leaving his home, coming back, is not to come back in the family life, but to deliver his brother, elder brother, Dhritarashtra, from this ignorance, which is the next topic we talked about. He is coming to rescue Dhritarashtra from this ignorance, and that ignorance is not doing anything about this impending death or this final examination of life, as we call it. So Vidura, being very merciful on his brother, he wants to deliver his brother, and that's why he came back to the palace and trying to rescue Dhritarashtra from this ignorance. We talked about the verse how in Bhagavad Gita 8.6, Krishna is saying that the state of being one remembers at the time of death is attained in their next body. So what is the importance of cultivating Krishna consciousness or spiritual consciousness so that one can get out of this cycle of birth and death? We talked about reacting versus responding. In material life, we are pretty much always in the reaction or reactive mode, but we should try to be in a responsive mode, or try to respond, meaning try to be at a more permanent platform than try to be at a temporary platforms, simply trying to mitigate different problems and dangers. Instead, we should try to make some permanent solution. It's only possible to make permanent solution if we act at the platform of the soul. At the platform of the body, we can only react. It is not possible to make a permanent solution at the platform of the body, because body is temporary. And then lastly, cruel death cares for none. So again, Krishna says in 10.34, Mrityu sarva haraschaham, meaning I am the impeding, I am the death at the time of death. If whether you want to see or not want to see the Lord, Krishna will come as death. So rather, we should try to voluntarily see Krishna before so that we can cultivate or attain that consciousness. Talk that life is a terminal disease, and instead of trying to close our eyes like the rabbit, we should try to cultivate that, try to do something about it. There are many different examples in the scriptures about, like, for example, Maharaj Parikshit, how he perfected his life. Instead of reacting, he responded. Instead of going in a reactive mode and trying to worry about this, his death coming in 7 days, trying to or getting depressed or anything like that, he actually made a permanent solution. He approached his spiritual master Shukadev Goswami, heard Srimad Bhagavatam, and perfected his life. And that's what Vidura is coming here to deliver his elder brother, even though his brother had not treated him well throughout his life. He's still compassionate because he's compassionate, because he's at the spiritual platform. At a material platform, it would not be possible to be compassionate, because at a material platform, those memories would constantly prevent him to be compassionate. But because he is at a spiritual platform, he's looking at from the platform of the soul. He's being compassionate, and he has come to save his elder brother Dhritarashtra. So with that, I would like to end and invite any questions or discussions if there are. These are not new topics, especially for devotees. So I don't think, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't have any discussions.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Please accept my humble obeisances.
Please
All
accept
glory
mine too.
to Guru.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Prabhuji, wonderful topic, and the way you took it and you presented it was so nice. Particularly, like how, as devotees, we should be working on how to approach death and why to approach death like that way. And the discussion that pessimism versus optimism. One behavior of devotees that comes to my mind when we talk about optimism is, whenever there's a birthday, we always say, may you never take birth again, which is also indicative of the same thing. We are inviting it in such a way that we don't want to take birth again. Whether that happens, or how we practice towards that, is what probably Vidura is speaking about. But that's what I think. Thank you so much.
Yeah, at least we are aspiring for it, and we are constantly reminding ourselves, whatever the occasion might be, birthday or any any occasion. Thank you for your comment, Radha Kunjbihari Prabhu. With this, I would like to end. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day, Saturday morning. वाञ्छकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः. Thank you. Hare Krishna.